we're going to begin our 2:15 session on revitalization, and I'm going to pray before we go any further. So let's pray. Father, thank you for this time together on talking about a very important topic, not just for our individual church represented here, but for the region as well, revitalization. So Lord, I got a lot of stuff to talk about, and I believe as I've prayed about it, you've given me things, and so let it come out right. Let it be heard right. Give us ears to hear, and at the very minimum, challenge our thinking, and we trust you for doing that. We give you this session. This is for your glory, for your church, not for us. In Jesus' name, amen. So, it's always great when somebody shows up for a workshop, so thank you. My name's Tom Piers. I'm the pastor of State Street Church in Portsmouth. I took over as the pastor there a year ago. I pleaded with God not to send me there. He did not listen. But it was an interesting situation. I came into the Portsmouth church, which, how many have been to that facility? Okay, so you know it's a gorgeous location, and it's a gorgeous facility, and you're surrounded by, just young, trendy, secular people, and they're all over the place, and right in the heart of the city, 5-minute walk from Congress Street, which is the main drag. And started out with a bang. The church started out in 1894. Facility was built in 1941. I think the bell tower was supposed to be dedicated on a Sunday night of Pearl Harbor. They had to cancel it or adjust it or something. So it has some real history. Make a long story short, this church, like many churches, start here, then they eke it over time, they're down to nothing. And when I candidated for the church in the summer of, so it'd be about a year, 3, 4, 5 months ago, I started to assess whether I felt that it had a pulse. And I didn't believe that it did. And so it was my judgment, and my wife's judgment, that just didn't believe it. It's too far gone. But God started to speak to us and wouldn't let us go on that one. And though all signs of the natural were that way, we took it and have tried to be faithful. And so, the first 2 months, I did nothing but teach about change. That's all I did for 2 months. October, November, 1 year ago, I just thought about changing why we're doing what we're doing. When I was candidating, I tried to assess some pulse. So when you're checking vital signs of a human being, there's certain things you check. When it's a church, you check certain things. And it wasn't coming up with anything. And so during the candidating process, I said, how many people have been saved in the last year or 2 years? Nothing. When was the last new member? Nothing. When was the last visitor from outside the ministry area? Nothing. When was the last baptism? Nothing. You keep asking questions and you keep getting answers, and none of the answers were good. And so we came into it with 37 people. My first service, October, whatever it was, first Sunday in October a year ago, with 37 people. And I just checked this week, and half of them are gone. All right? For one reason or another. So we have this church that was like this, came down, and so when I was candidating, and let me just say up front, this may have been called, a good title for this workshop, A Contrarian's Guide to Revitalization, because I may not do it exactly the way you would do it, and there's probably a real good chance you won't do it this way. But I've been a pastor for 33 years. November 4th coming up will be 33 years. And part of that time I was trained in church consulting. I planted a church in Rochester, New York. November 4th, 1979, we went from, besides my wife and I, 8-10 people to over 600. 600. I was there 19 years as a senior pastor, went to Boynton Beach, Florida, associate pastor there. Phoenix, Arizona, a year and a half as a director of a couple of Lutheran Christian Jewish Messianic ministries. I was an executive pastor at a church of about 1,000 people in Florence, Kentucky, which is just outside Cincinnati, I-75. Up in Maine, Cumberland, Maine, a teaching pastor for 4 years, and then took a couple of years off and then back at this church. Part of that time, actually I didn't mention the church consulting part. I was trained in church consulting and strategic planning. I went to Dr. Tom Rayner. Anybody ever heard that name? I went to all of his consulting levels, different levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, with Dr. Tom Rayner out of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. Went through all of his training in multiple weeks. Went out to Seattle with Dr. Mel Main, Leadership Development Resources. Went to Columbus, Ohio for boot camp for revitalization. And Southern California and some other stuff. And after I got trained, I started doing church consulting, traveling the nation for about a year and a half, getting into churches. And typically I would do a weekend consult and then give them about a 100-page report on what I was seeing. But that ended, and then I got to pastoring again. That's when I went to Maine and then down here to Portsmouth. So I knew the questions to ask, and I knew the signs of life, and I've been trained to spot, things, and then, make a go of it if a go of it was warranted. And so last 2 weeks we've had about 60, so 37 to 60, and that's 55+% attendance increase in the first year. I don't pretend that's going to keep going, but man, wouldn't it be great to have 55%? If you keep rolling that out 5 years, you're going to have a pretty good sized church. I don't pretend that that's going to happen. One of the things when I was candidating at this church is I said, see, anybody go to a car dealer and they do a bait and switch thing on you? And so I said to the board of directors there at this church, I don't want to do a bait and switch on you because you just need to know how I am hardwired by God. I wish I wasn't hardwired this way, but I am. I'm hardwired by God to shake and move things and pop things and analyze things, and if they're not working, axe it, change it, adjust it, whatever. But whatever they do, don't tolerate the status quo. I mean, it's just how I'm wired. And so in the candidating process, I said I would change everything. And so there was a lot of discussion, and someone, I remember, I can tell you exactly where I was standing. They said, like, what would you change? And I said, everything. I would change everything about this church. The thing that's on the wall right there that someone's grandmother made, who's going to be mad when I take that down? This, that, and the other, musical style, dress, aesthetic, stage light, I mean, length of service, your printed materials, your website, your logo, the pews, just everything I would change. So I said, if you're not ready for that, don't even look at me, because you'll be doing yourself a favor, you'll certainly be doing me a favor. And so it's kind of like a motorcycle accident in this case. If you were to come up upon somebody that was in a motorcycle accident and they're just about to die or just about to die, and someone comes up to the victim and says, "Sir, I'm going to have to move your arm," and if they have any breath at all, they're going to say, "I don't care what you do. I'm about to die here. Move whatever you got to move." It's only when you get healthy that you start saying, "Yeah, I don't want that hospital. I want this hospital. I don't want that doctor. I want this doctor. I don't want that medication. I want this medication. I don't want that nurse. I want this nurse. And fussy, I don't want to eat that tonight." It's only when you get healthy you start to act like that. But when you're about to die, you go, "Yeah, well, whatever you got to do, just do it." And that's how this church was for the most part. So we started it, and I kept my word. And another thing I said during the candidating process is, and I'm not going to do it incrementally. I said it'll be almost immediate. I'm going to teach a little bit, but then I'm going to pull the trigger. It's going to be almost immediate. Some of them were immediate. And so it won't be incremental because I don't believe in incremental change. That's me. I mean, I've never seen small incremental change work. If you have a case for that, that's great. I just haven't seen it. I've never seen it. So I said, people are going to hell. We're going to pull the trigger on this. We're going to make the changes. And I said, it's like a Band-Aid. Would you rather pull it off real slow, or would you just rather pull the thing off? So that's what, and I was up front with them, and so they took a vote, and I won by the narrowest of margins. No, I wasn't a bit more than a narrow margin. So I came in and I kept my word immediately. Length of service, dress. I wear blue jeans and a shirt on Sundays. Music style immediately went to contemporary. And so last year we changed the website, changed the name of the church because I want to make a clear break. Changed the website to a very darn good website. Just 6 weeks ago, the pews came out, added new modern chairs came in, stage lighting, contemporary music, contemporary band. We've hired some students from Gordon College to come up and help us with the band thing. And just on and on and on. I let Sunday school die a natural death. I wanted to put my eggs in the basket of small groups during the week, which is still my strategy and philosophy. It's not that I can't Sunday school, I didn't, but I just let it die a natural death. I didn't advertise it, wasn't listed on the website, wasn't listed in the bulletin, wasn't listed anywhere. I just kind of let it go because I wanted to get people out of the building and into homes in the community versus come to us, and I'll talk about that. And so, the last year, now about 2 or 3 months into my existence as the pastor there, we had a membership drive. And what I mean by that is we drove off about 30% of the members. And not intentionally, but just the changes were too much for them. And a number of them that gave lip service, and I don't blame them at all, I'm not mad at them, but a number of them that said, yeah, we signed up for the change, we know it's got to change, we're about to die, found out that they really weren't ready for the change, and that's okay. That's okay. I knew that was going to happen. It didn't bum me out at all. It wasn't intentional, but it did happen. So that's kind of where we are 1 year into this revitalization. And let me say that most of the time when I've come into churches, I've come when the ball was on the 50-yard line. I've never come into a church where the ball was on their own goal line or the 1 yard line or the 2 yard line, their own 2 yard line. So this is a different thing to me. It is the hardest thing I have ever done in 33 years of being a pastor. And I'm pretty, contemporary, innovative guy. It is still hard. It's the hardest thing I've ever, it's challenging everything I can do here. And really, literally for the first 6 months, every Sunday, and this was a visceral, you know the word visceral? Instinctive. Every Sunday I would turn around and look out at just a few bodies and I go, oh my goodness, what have I done? I have missed God this biggest day and night. I have missed God for the 10th time in my life. That went on for 6, 7, 8 months, every single Sunday. I didn't mean to think that way, but every time I turned around, I went, oh my goodness. But just in the last couple months, new faces that I know would have never come there in the way that it was. New faces from the community, from 37 to about 60. And I'm just chipping away at it. I'm not a guru, but there's some things. The Bible says we know in part and we prophesy in part. So I came to give you the part that I know. The part that I don't know, I'm moving that first. All right. So here we go. Let me just start into this. And let me just say that I don't have notes to hang out, but every single one of you can get my notes if you email me. I'll send you the PowerPoint or a PDF version of the PowerPoint. I'm flying too fast, and I want your mind on the screen. So you can get this exact PowerPoint if you email me. But here's our choices here. Basically when it comes down to it, you got church planting, church revitalization, and church resurrection. That's your choices. Now, church planting, that's the big thing today, and I believe it. And Angela's talking about that an hour or whatever. And the theme there is it's easier to give birth than it is to raise the dead. All right? It's just easier to give birth than to raise the dead. Because when you give, when you do something, when you plant a church, you are infusing the DNA. You already have a core group if you're doing it smart. Now, it's a church planting strategy. You're supposed to start with about 35, 40 really committed people. They already have your DNA. You gel together, all this kind of mission statement, vision. And so, but when you do a revitalization, it's a different thing. So it's easier to give birth than it is to raise the dead, which leads me to this point. There's a difference between church revitalization and church resurrection. It takes a whole lot more power to do a resurrection. A whole lot more power. To do a revitalization, you have to have some fighting. I didn't sense any. With all my parameters and my pulse signals, I didn't sense any. So this is really a resurrection, and almost like, because it's a new mission, new pastor, new way of doing things, new everything. It's almost a hybrid between a church plant and a resurrection. It's very different. It's really crazy. But those are our choices. And my point here is there's a whole lot of difference between a resurrection and a revitalization because it takes a whole lot more power for a resurrection. That's just the way it is. And so we have to discern what state are we in. Now there's a guy by the name of Max Dupre, his book Leadership is an Art. And Max Dupre in that book on page 11 says the first responsibility of a leader is to define reality. The first responsibility of a leader is to define reality, and leaders avoid this. They avoid it. There's something that is called, well, let me just give this to you. There's something called pain avoidance model. I meant to put it in the PowerPoint, but I didn't. Pain avoidance model, PAM, by a guy named Michael Jensen out of Harvard. And what he says is most executives follow the pain avoidance, you can Google this, pain avoidance model, which means if there's any pain, they'll do anything, but it takes an extraordinary executive to face the reality and the pain and do something about it. Most executives do not. They see the reality, they see the pain, but they can't do anything about it. And so a proper diagnosis, DX, leads to a proper prescription about helping. If you don't properly diagnose your problem, and I'll get to that in just a little bit, in just a little while, but if you're diagnosing your problem is, well, we just don't have saxophone, we just don't have PowerPoint, or those are that's superficial stuff. You're not diagnosing correctly. So a proper diagnosis leads to a proper prescription as far as revitalization is concerned. Now here's a question. What percentage of the 7,000 churches that closed last year quoted Matthew 19:26? With God, all things are possible in the year or two before they closed. So we got to be careful. I believe in prayer and I believe in God can do all stuff. But at a certain point, we got to get real here. I'm going back to the reality thing here. Because I guarantee you there's a good percentage of the 7,000, depending on who you read, the 5,000, 7,000 churches that died last year, probably quoted that verse quite a bit. And in fact, I'm pretty sure the 7 churches in the book of Revelation chapter 2 and 3 did probably too. None of them are alive today. All 7 churches in the book of Revelation are dead. So churches died, and that does not mean it's God's will. I'm not a hyper-Calvinist, sorry. I don't believe everything that happens here is God's will. I believe some good churches that closed but didn't need to close. So, but we're looking, we're afraid to face reality. It's like the guy the officer on the Titanic that said to the captain, it looks like an iceberg, but we need more data. Actually, you don't. You really don't need any more data. Just do something about it. Even the churches that grow these days, it's transfer growth and not conversion growth. The last stats that and they might even change, 5% of all church growth in the United States is conversion growth, 95% of it is transfer growth. Transfer growth is sheep going from one pen to the other. That's all it is. Sheep going from one pen to the other. Just church hopping. Churches grow just from church hopping. Rick Warren says that's not growing, that's swelling. It's not even growth. You're just swelling. And so that's the problem. And so even, it's just pathetic what's happening in the United States. Only 4 or 5% of all church growth is conversion growth. Ought not be that way. That's not the case, by the way, in South America, Latin America, Asia, the Philippines, places like that. Totally different ballgame. So I'm going to talk to you about what's called the life cycle, and this is just basic stuff. I apologize for how basic this is. But even if you get a nugget out of this, it'll be worth it. So this is just so simple. Bell curve, and you start with birth and you come up the incline. At a certain point in a church history, you recline, and then you start to decline, and then eventually you have death. And you say, well, that's not God's will. Again, go back to the 7 churches of the book of Revelation and see, it happens. It's not God's will, but it happens. Now here's my point on here. Every single time this happens, it's because of a loss of vision and mission. Somewhere just around the plateau or just past the plateau, it is because of a loss of passionate mission that you start to decline and go down. All right? And that's just the way it is. Typically here, the DIs leave and you're left with the S's and C's. Say what? Was it? Come again? What was that? In the DISC temperament survey, the DISC DISC temperament survey, the D's are like directing, dominating, decisive leaders. Go get them leaders. The I's are the inspiring people person, influencing, interactive. The D's and the I's typically will leave if you're in a decline long enough. That leaves you with the S's, which are the steadies, the stables, the security-oriented people. And then the C's also, cautious, contemplating, calculating. It looks like an iceberg, but we need more data type people, right? And so that's a problem, and that's a problem that we need to deal with. And so let me give you some other things about this vision life cycle connection. A church starts with vision. Every single church that's ever started with some vision. Somebody was excited about God, about Jesus, and they pop a church, they start a church. Could be in the living room, could be in the range hall, whatever. It starts. Shortly after it starts, what happens is you start to put some strategy with it. All right? Now, what happens when you put vision and strategy is you start to grow. And and you're on the incline. Now, at a certain point, you do vision, strategy. Now you start to add some structure, which are programs and policies and all this kind of stuff. And so now you've got vision and strategy and structure. But at a certain point, you lose something, and I've already alluded to it, you lose the mission. So at recline, no more vision, but you're left with some strategy and some structure. All right? And on the decline, or eventually the real decline, that was recline. On the decline, forget the vision, forget the strategy. Strategies are not effective, you dump them. But you're left with your programs. My goodness, don't give up those programs. We're sticking with the they're not working, but we're sticking with them. All right? And then eventually death. You let me see, is that right? Yeah, you're left with nothing. With death. And that's typically how it happens, all right? And so the future of a church that is in decline as far as revitalization is not in the people who are there. The key to it is reaching people who are not there. Because if you're going to preserve the heritage, preserve the tradition, preserve how things are done, at the expense of the people outside the four walls, it's not going to work. So what's needed is we have to destructure what we have. I didn't just say destroy. I said we're going to have to destructure to allow new vision with new strategy, new structures to come into place here. In other words, new wine, listen now, new wine has to come into new wineskins. New wineskins are structure. New ways of doing things. New structure for your board. New structure for your polity. New structure for your programming and everything. New structure. New wine, a new way of doing things has got to come in to new wineskins, period. So the key to recognize the whole thing is, the key to this is you got to do a jump start right up at, when you sense things are starting to plateau a little bit, that's the time to jump start something else. A new program, new way of doing things, whatever. And there's lots of ways you can do that. There's books about that. But and it takes an extraordinary leader to discern where that X is. Now, I served a pastor one time that they were on that plateau for quite a while, and we kept rationalizing with this. Well, we're just on a plateau, and it's a needed time of strengthening. Yeah, but that plateau's going on and on and on and on and on. Say, really? Hey, Pastor, how long is this plateau going? Well, I don't know. Like, we're on a plateau, so you go a year, 2 years, 3 years. Well, at a certain point, you got leaders define reality. They say, yeah, there's something wrong. We got to jump start this thing, right? So that's what we have to do, and it takes an extraordinary leader to discern that point right here. Here's some elements of the life cycle with different attributes. Let me just name this, and again, you can get this PowerPoint, the email, I'll give you the whole thing. But let's take, you got incline, recline, spirit. Let's take spirit. Okay, when you start out, you got intense morale, don't you? You're fired up. You are excited. Let me tell you, if you're not excited at the incline, you ought to get out of business or something. All right? But then eventually at the recline, you get satisfied, and eventually you're complacent on the decline. How about time? Incline is all future-oriented. The recline is present, and when you're on the decline, it's all past-oriented. Remember the glory days. How about faith? High risk when you're on the incline, low risk when you're at the plateau, recline, and then no risk on the decline. How about attitude? Do or die when you're on the incline. It's do or die. Things depend on this. Let's lay our lives down for this. When you recline, live and let live. Let's not be in a hurry here. And then when decline, don't do it or we'll die. Don't try that new program. It'll all blow up and we'll all be out of here. Money, investor, recline, sustainer, decline, preserver. Management style, entrepreneurial. If you're in the incline, you're just management oriented. On the recline, and you're just, when you're plateauing, just kind of managing things. And then you're a custodian of how things were done on the decline. Goals. On the incline you build, and the recline you maintain. On the decline you survive. That's all about surviving. On energy, vision, mission is on the incline. But when you're on the plateau, it's about maintaining program. When you're on the decline, it's maintain structure. We are not changing this. Last 7 words of a dying church, dead church. We've never done it that way before. Psychology. When you start a church, it's test pilot. You can't wait. When you're in the plateau, it's autopilot. And when you're declining, we just need to find a pilot light. So, leaders, new leaders, on the incline, recline, established leaders. Your focus is on established leaders instead of developing new leaders when you're on the incline. And then on the decline, it's the incumbents. The incumbents have all the power, and it's all about the incumbents. That's just the way it is. Now let me give you the number one thing needed for revitalization, and here it is, and it's this. The number one thing needed for revitalization is discontentment. You will never revitalize a church until there is sufficient discontentment. Not just for the pastor or associate, I mean amongst the larger core of the leaders. You will never revitalize a church until there is sufficient discontentment within that church at large. There's a really great book called 44 Steps Off the Plateau. It's kind of an old book now. Lyle Schaller, anybody ever hear of Lyle Schaller? Lyle Schaller comes in to do a consultation in a church, and this is what he says. First thing he gets into a church, Lyle Schaller says, "So what year is it here?" What's he asking? I've seen churches, it's still 1945, it's still 1955. Lyle Schaller's first question is what year is it here? Amazing. But here's what he says on page 61 of 44 Steps off the Plateau. Why do many congregations move down off that plateau and begin a period of numerical decline? Why do so few move up off that plateau? 3 overlapping reasons were identified in the previous chapter. That's a good book to read. Number 1, the unwillingness to change. Number 2, the attractiveness of the status quo. And here you go, something I said earlier, the absence of sufficient discontent with the status quo to motivate and support change. Number 3, a reluctance to pay the price of change. That's what that's the 3 things. I'll send you the PDF for wrap your mind around that statement, because this is what we're fighting. Now, when you start to change, here's what happens as far as quantity over time. First you start with all existing congregation. 1 year ago I started with all existing congregation, 100%. No one new. But now over time, and this is just 1 year, we just sent out 10,000 mail cards a month ago. 10,000 mail cards, really full glossy, nice, to the area. We had a concert with a band from Nashville, Tennessee, kicked off a Sunday morning and a Saturday night concert. Started a brand new teaching series called The Main Thing in 30 Minutes or Less. And that was on the card. Part 1 was on marriage, marriages that go the distance. Part number 2 was on friendships, of finding safe people. Part number 3, this coming Sunday, as in 2 days from now, is going to be about juggling priorities, living the balanced life, the simple life. Part 4 is Heaven, kind of spinning off of Andy Stanley's book, Heaven, How Good is Good Enough. We sent 10, now that cost us $3,000 out of Outreach.com. Outreach.com is the one that did it for us, including postage, $3,000. And for the concert, I'll be getting to this a little bit later, but at the concert and the first 2 weeks, which are the last 2 weeks of the teaching series, had a lot of new faces. Almost every one of them was from the direct mail card. None of them were from personal invites. That's not good. That's not good. It's not good, but that's what happened. And I'll be teaching about that in just a second. But as the time goes on, you are creating an emerging congregation. Listen, the remnant never grows. The remnant will never grow. It'll only get smaller. Just those are mechanical facts. The existing congregation, if anything, will get smaller as people get annoyed or find a new place to worship or whatever. The emerging congregation is what grows. And here's another point to keep in mind about this, and I learned this in church consulting. It takes 9 times more energy to reclaim a dropout than to reach a new person. 9 times more energy. I'm not saying don't do it, just be willing to spend 9 times more energy. All right, this is where we get into the fun. Here you go. There's 2 types of growth, organic and inorganic. Organic growth, as the name implies, is natural growth. It occurs from relationships. It's naturally occurring relationships. Inorganic growth is stuff that is not connected to relationships whatsoever. Direct mail cards, newspaper ads, handout tracts, PSAs on the radio, whatever it may be. So organic, let me hit that. Organic is James 1. Andrew goes out and gets Peter. Philip goes and gets Nathaniel. John chapter 1. John chapter 4, the woman at the well gets a whole village and brings them out to Jesus. That is organic growth or naturally occurring relationships. Organic doesn't cost you anything. Inorganic costs you a whole lot. Both can be effective. Both can be effective. Now, what's the more biblical? Organic. I found out just in the last 3 weeks that my gang is not inviting people. So I'm forced at this juncture in our history to do a lot of inorganic stuff. Because our people are not networked in. I'm going to get to that in a second too. So here's a book that you know, probably you've heard of it, Natural Church Development, Christian Discourse. The whole idea of this book is about natural growth occurring just naturally. Mark chapter 4 talks about it, 26 to 29. This is from the Contemporary English Bible. Then Jesus said, this is what God's kingdom is like. It's as though someone scatters seed on the ground, then sleeps and wakes night and day. The seed sprouts up, grows, the farmer doesn't know how. The earth produces crops, and I love this, all by itself. It's just natural. You water that church, you teach your people how to witness, you teach your people about getting missional out in the community, rubbing elbows with non-Christians, all by itself. It starts to grow. All by itself. First the stalk, then the head, the full head of grain. And whenever the crop is ready, the farmer goes out to cut the grain because it's harvest time. That's natural, or what Christian Schwartz says in his book, Natural Church Development, is what he calls biotic growth. Don't be scared by that term. But here's what I've discovered. If we trace the problem from the superficial to the root cause, here's what we're going to come up with. Let's take the fact that maybe that your church is not growing. Now there's reasons for that. There's reasons that churches don't grow. One book I have says if you just remove the obstacles, it'll grow. It's meant. Churches are meant to grow. They're meant to grow. If you remove the obstacles, it'll grow. So what happens is let's start inspecting the fruit to see why churches don't grow. You say ineffective strategies. I learned in church consulting that the average car has 2 people. You could have a congregation that seats 400 people, but if you have a parking lot with 50 spaces, you are going to hit the lid at 100 people. This is, you don't have to believe me. If you've got 50 spaces, the average car takes 2 people, you got 50 spaces, that's 100 people. I don't care if your auditorium seats 1,000. If you got a parking problem, you got a parking problem. And you're going to tap out somewhere around 100. There's other 70% occupancy. When you reach 70% occupancy, you got to add new chairs. It used to be 80%. It's lower than that now. Ineffective assimilation. Let's go deeper. Let's take fruit that's little. Let's go deeper. Ineffective assimilation systems. You're not keeping people. Ineffective outreach systems. Go deeper. You're not attracting people. Why aren't you? This last Monday, I went to Boston and I found that my family, Piers, P-E-E-R-S, families from Boston. My son's on Ancestry.com. He's like got this on the brain right now. He's wigging out on it. So he has me go down to Boston and look up my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather's gravestones at Holy Cross Cemetery in Malden. All right, so I go there and I can't find them. I'm frustrated. I can't find gravestones. And so I go to the office. It's a Catholic cemetery. So I go to the office, the mausoleum building, and I find out. But on the way out, I see a brochure about attracting Catholics back. And here's the brochure. This is just for Monday. That doesn't, if I was thinking, just even thinking about coming back to church, and they were going to pour a pitcher of water over my head, I would say, I'll pass on that. And I think that, so, I'm not sure, I'm just talking about attracting. That may not be the best attracting picture if you're trying to advertise people to join the Catholic Church. It actually didn't go over as well as I thought it was going to. But I thought it was kind of fun. I thought it was like, oh yeah, where do I sign up for that? All right. But anyhow, the church growth ratio book by Win Arm, Charles Arm. There's some ratios that we got to keep attention to. So let's go deeper. He says that 5 out of 100 of your people should be first-time visitors on a Sunday. Every 5 out of 100 should be first-time visitors. If you got 50, all right, 2.5. And from your ministry area, not from Minnesota because they're in visiting, they should be from your ministry area. 1 out of 4 visitors ought to return if you're doing follow-up correctly. Things like that. But let's go deeper. People are not sharing Christ with others. Now we're getting deep. Now we're getting deep. People are not sharing Christ with others. Now we're getting into the root stuff. But let's go a little bit deeper. People are not living. Now we're going to go deeper. People are not living incarnational lives. When they go jogging, they jog with Christians. When they play racquetball, they play with Christians. When they golf, they go with Christians. When they go to the movies, they go with Christians. When they have people for dinner, it's Christians. That's not incarnational. Incarnational is you're rubbing elbows with lost people. Bill Hybels, go play golf with Christians. Go play golf with non-Christians. Non-Christians. Now I'm going to get to the biggest reason. People are not passionate about Jesus. Our people, that's the big one. People are not passionate about Jesus Christ. That is the biggest reason. Our people are lukewarm. They just do the drill. They're not fired up for Jesus. The people in Acts 2, 3, 4, they were fired up for Jesus. They didn't go through a Romans Road seminar. They were just fired up for Jesus. And it rubbed off on people. And that's the number one thing that we're fighting. That's what we have to address. And so, anyhow, revitalized Christians are what make revitalized churches. All right? That's just a fact. Neil Cole, I'm just reading a book right now called Church Transfusion by Neil Cole. He says what the church needs is a transfusion of the blood of Jesus to fire us all up. Our DNA within our church is wrong. They do church, they do activities, it's the same thing, they serve on committees. But are they rubbing elbows with the lost? No. Are they giving a verbal witness for Jesus Christ? No. Are they passionate and fired up for Jesus Christ? No. Excellent book for you to read. And what we come down to is there are 2 types of things that we have in churches, attractional methods and missional methods. I'm probably saying stuff that you already know. Attractional methods are come to our building for this great church service or event. Missional is when we act like missionaries and we get into the society, out of the building, and we get into our communities to rub off on people. Now, I'm going to tell you something. Attractional worked really good 2 or 3 decades ago. It's not working too good now. Now, there's an article on the desk, revitalization desk, out there by James Emery White. I hope you can pick that article up about why we're not reaching the young church, and this is what he says. when you read the paper first, no one reads the paper anymore anyhow, okay, but let's just say you did. And you read the paper, and you came to a car ad by Toyota. Did you look at it real heavy? Chances are you didn't. You skipped right over it because you are not in the market for a car. If you're not in the market for a car, you're going to skip right over the car ad. You're going to send a direct mail card out advertising your really slick church event. They're not in the market for God, so they're going to throw it out. They're going to see your really cool ad in the newspaper. They're going to turn the page. They're not into God. They don't care much about God. They're not in the market for God, so they're going to turn the page. You see, the attractional method it only works for people who are really, really seeking in the first place. That's why we got to do this missional thing. Really, it's a big deal. Michael Frost, in his book, The Road to Missional, says this. There's a lot of churches that do the servant evangelism stuff. They go out and they pass out models with the church label at parades and festivals, and they pass out this, and they clean bathrooms, all this kind of stuff. What he says in the book is basically these churches have fooled themselves into thinking they're missional by doing missional events. But between missional events, their people are not living missional, incarnational lives with non-Christians. So they fool themselves into thinking they're being incarnational and missional. And they're not. Because we just did an event 4 weeks ago, we had our water bottles. We're a missional church. No, not really. So what's needed is this. George Barna says this: a church cannot be turned around until a contingent of people is so firmly committed to the ministry of the church that they will sacrifice almost anything for the good of the church, for the glory of God. It's going to take just committed people to get out there. Church growth, there's a spiritual side and the natural side. And the spiritual side, we tend to spiritualize things. We maybe even have been guilty of this. All you have to do is preach the word and pray. Just pray and preach the word. That's a ditch. That's a ditch. No, there's more to it than just preach the word and pray. That's the spiritual side. The natural side is you just have to have slick programs, contemporary Christian music, wear jeans, have a cool PowerPoint. All you have to do that and you'll grow. That's a ditch. And the answer is you got to have everything. You got to have both the spiritual. I wish I could spend more time on these. There's a spiritual side and the natural side, and churches seem to go to one or the other and not balance both. Here's some ingredients that you need for revitalization. Let me start at the top, church-wide prayer. If that's not happening, you will not revitalize. There's a book called The Prayer-Saturated Church. That'd be a good book to get and read. You need strong, committed core group. You need sufficient discontent. You need willingness to change. You need the right polity. You're not going to go anywhere if everybody in the church has to vote on every little thing. And I expected that because I was right about that point. Right strategy, demographic match to the community. What do you mean by that? If you're an all-white church and you're surrounded urban by all, blacks or Hispanics or whatever, that's a mismatch, demographic mismatch. What Peter Wagner calls ethnicitis. There's ways around that, but you're going to have to deal with it. Experienced entrepreneurial pastor, financial resources, all of these things, and it leads me to one thing that is out there but doesn't have the full ball of wax on there, and it's this. When I come to a church, I do this. I give them an assessment. And the assessment is called the degree of probability, meaning the degree of probability that the church can experience a successful revitalization. Now, there's a whole bunch of questions, but when it's over, there's a little dot somewhere on that diagram. There's a dot. For your congregation, they assess the pastor, they assess the lay people, and there's a dot. There's next, something right there. Now, what this says, and you can look on the horizontal axis, the degree of relatedness. Degree of relatedness means, are your people rubbing elbows with non-Christians all the time in your community at the age demographic that you're targeting for your church? Our church right now is targeting 30s and 40s, something like that. That's what we're targeting. So are your people related into the non-Christian community, and are they making strong relationships with non-Christians in that demographic? In my case, they weren't. On the vertical axis, the degree of readiness. Are they ready to experience the change needed to pull off a revitalization? Yes or no? So you grade yourself. Now here's the deal. If they have a high readiness and a high relatedness, blast off, man. Blast off. That church is going to go somewhere. If they have a high readiness, they're ready, but they're not related into the community, you've got to do some heavy teaching on missionary to create a missionary mindset, that your people are missionaries. How about this? There's a very high relatedness. They're related to all the people in the community. They have good, strong relationship. We're not Christians. They're not ready. Well, then you got to teach on change and urgency. That's what you got to teach on. And this is what I was taught in church consulting. You don't have to believe it. Low readiness, low relatedness. They need a chaplain. Hospice care. Because they're going to die, and they just need to be made comfortable. And as with anything in hospice care, you help them set their church in order, assets. What are you going to do? Hand it over. But if it's low related, low readiness, that's probably what's going to happen. All right, last thing here. Here's the last point I want to make when we close. Anybody here of Henry Blackaby with Experiencing God? One of the premises of his book is find where God is working and get involved with it. Find signs of God and jump into it. All right? And so I would say, in order for revitalization to happen, you have to see God at work. And this is going to be strong. But if you don't see God in that thing, it's too hard. I wouldn't attempt revitalization unless I see God really moving in people. Why are people wanting to revitalize? Is it to restore institutional glory? Not good enough. Is it to save resources of the church? Not good enough. Is it because God is on that place? People are passionate for Jesus. Now we're getting somewhere. And so it's like the Exodus 33:15. Then he said to Moses, or Moses said to God, this is what Moses prayed, if your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here. And I think a valid prayer is, if your presence is not in this revitalization, let's leave it. That I would take the team. Last thing, literally, this is the last Oswald Sanders. There's a book, really cool book called The Leap or The Faith of Leap. Get a hold of the title of the book, The Faith of Leap. Not the leap of faith. The faith needed to take this type of leap. It's an incredible book. But in that book, Oswald Sanders has a quote. And it's this: a great deal more failure is the result of an excess of caution than of bold experimentation with new ideas. The frontiers of the kingdom of God were never advanced by men and women of caution. It's just they weren't. The frontiers of the kingdom of God were advanced by men and women who said, we got to do something, and we better get after it, because time's clicking on. So I hope that you got something out of this. There's a lot there, I know. I tend to do that. I tend to load it up pretty good. But that'll get you thinking. And I hope there's one or two things that caught your attention, even if you didn't agree with me. And let's pray. And if you need, give me your email or whatever, card or whatever. If you need the email or my email, I have a card out there. Or if you want the simple email that I check 48 times a day, that email. That would be tom@statestreetchurch.com. tom@statestreetchurch, all spelled out. tom@statestreetchurch.com. And I'll rebound with you with the PowerPoint or the PDF, depending. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for the privilege of Greg giving me the opportunity to share some great droppings on revitalization. And I thank you that this is a big deal. This is a big deal. This is a really big deal. But it will come at the hands of people, as we saw in the last book, who are courageous and bold. I pray that we will have that type